Greetings gamers, my name is Anto and today we're taking a look at the new Inkarnate 2.0 beta. This video is sponsored by DeMille's Wondrous Works, more on them later. So I've been waiting very impatiently for this update to Inkarnate ever since they announced it during Gen Con 2022. I've held off making all kinds of content about Inkarnate because I suspected it would end up being out of date when this update came out, and it got so delayed that I started to think it was actually never gonna release. But it's here and I've finally got access to the Inkarnate 2.0 beta. So today I'm going to be taking a look at it and giving you my initial thoughts on this. Now, the 2.0 beta is a major update to the Inkarnate mapmaking system, and it's introducing a lot of new tools which have been requested and we've been waiting for a long time, such as path tools, the ability to create rooms, and a snap to grid option. Now, on the one hand, it's amazing to me that it's 2024 and I'm so excited to be getting what seem like such basic features like snap to grid, but on the other hand, the lack of these features has been the biggest thing holding Inkarnate back for years. Those of you who've watched the channel for a long time will know that I've made a lot of videos on different mapping tools, particularly Wonder Draft and Dungeon Draft from Megasploof. Now, these were my go-to mapmaking tools for a long time, and eventually I moved away from them and started using Inkarnate, and I talked about why in this video, but I'm glad to see that Inkarnate is finally almost at feature parity with them, so I don't feel like I'm being left behind in terms of the features available in Inkarnate, and I can enjoy all of those features whilst also enjoying more high quality assets and a greater kind of update and fix release. So what we're going to do for this video is I'm just going to fire up Inkarnate. We're going to load up a map and play around with some of the tools. I'm going to give you some of my first impressions. So let's dive into it. So here we are, ready to create a new map in Inkarnate, and there's a couple of big changes that have come with the 2.0 beta, or at least this initial release of it. So the main two things as far as I'm concerned are, we have the sci-fi battle maps version of the tools. At the Gen Con announcement in 2022, they did also show off a classic black and white hand-drawn old school dungeon style. I have no idea what's happening with that. I've not seen hide nor hair of it, and it doesn't seem to be in this current version of the beta. Maybe we'll get it before the beta's over. I have no idea. But we're going to be working with the sci-fi battle maps today just to show off some of the new shiny stuff while we explore some of the new tools. And the other half of the new stuff that's come to Inkarnate is the room tool. Can't remember what they've decided to call it. I still call it the room tool. It is the ability to create predefined rooms with set walls and floor textures that snap to grid, and you can conform them to different shapes, much like you do in something like Dungeon Draft. This is one of the biggest things that's been missing from Inkarnate for making quick maps. Previously, if you wanted to make this kind of stuff, you had to go in and hand place walls and hand paint in floor textures, and that just took so long. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to load up a sci-fi battle map. We're going to keep it at the default landscape setting, but we're going to use the 4K resolution just because I like seeing those crispy details, and we'll go ahead and create our map. Now, right off the bat, my first gripe about sci-fi battle maps is that there are no planets. Like, you give us the first canvas that we see is this gorgeous starfield, and I get that it's about battle maps, but where are my planets? Why can't I make a solar system map for my sci-fi games using some beautiful planet stamps? I'm sure that will come eventually, but it's the first thing I tried to do when I saw this planetscape. Was like, oh, they probably have planets then. I'll go and see if I can create a planet sized map, or see if I could create like a solar system map for like a starfield, or worlds without number, stars without number, whatever the sci-fi games are. But nope, they don't have it. The starfield is just there to look pretty behind the spaceship maps that you create, which totally fair enough. I just wish there was planets. So I actually went ahead and changed the map scale here, made it so that the grid is a little bit larger, just so we have less to work at to fill in the map, just to make this process a little bit easier and quicker on myself. But if we go ahead and toggle on the grid, you can see I've made it a 20 by 15 grid versus the standard 40 by 30, just to make it so that I don't have to do as much work filling it in for this video and making a map. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create some ground. This is the first thing you do in most Inkarnate maps, and when we do, you can see that we get this nice like metal plate texture that I really like. Overall, I'm really impressed with the new textures and assets in the sci-fi style. They're all really pretty and really great quality, but I want to look at the tools. So what I want to do here is I want to create a little scene for us to experiment with these tools, and I'm thinking just kind of either a corner or an intersection of a road, 1 or 2 buildings, place down some assets, see how we get on. So for our road, we're going to use this nice light asphalt texture from the industrial section of the textures, and we're just going to toggle on the grid and find a spot. Now I can see a kind of L shape here that I think is going to work really well. So what I want to do is I want to switch over to the rectangle tool and just drag some of that in and start applying that texture. So there's our road texture down, and the next thing I want to do is I want to take a look at the new path tool or the line tool, and I want to see about getting some kind of curb in there, see if there's already some existing options for that. If not, what we can use for it. So we're going to go over to the line tool, open the catalog here, and we're going to start out by searching for curbs. We've got a couple of different ones. We've got metal curbs, gold curbs if we want to be super fancy, lit curbs, and then a few different industrial ones. Now, I like high visual contrast in my maps. I like big punchy looking maps, so we're going to go with the light curb here, and then we're going to toggle on the grid again. You can see that this isn't fully aligned to the grid, so we're not going to use any snap to grid options, which I don't actually see for this tool anyway, so it doesn't matter. But we do want to use the pen tool. There we go. The pen tool gives us the snap to grid option, but we do want to use the pen tool to get nice straight lines, and then we want to choose our starting point and go in and add our curb. Now immediately what I'm looking for is I'm looking at corners, because all tools like this that procedurally generate artwork of a repeating pattern along a path struggle with corners. It's something that Dungeon Draft struggles with. It's something that every program I've encountered that does this kind of thing really struggles with. So I wasn't expecting Inkarnate to be any different here. And if we take a look, you can see that there is some strange overlapping of the textures. They've tried to hide it by offsetting the seams, which I like. And I think when you're zoomed out, with the way that this light bar curves as well, it hides it pretty well. I think that's about as good as I would expect that particular texture to appear along a curve, really. But I did notice that if we go into the settings here, we do have options to change our caps and change how things end. So we can change from path endings to nodes, and nodes doesn't really do anything here. It just makes it look worse, so we keep it at paths. And we can toggle on caps, which would be at the end that we're not going to see here. But if I go ahead and draw another segment so that we can see what this looks like. So if we turn off caps, that gives us the seamless texture versus those defined endpoints. That's really useful for a line tool, depending on what you want to do with it. And then depending on whether we want path endings or node endings, it slightly changes the artwork as well. Again, really useful depending on how you're using it and how you want it to interact with other elements of your map. One thing that I used to find myself doing a lot in Dungeon Draft is I'd build walls and then I would place pillars over the corners to hide the crimes of the path tool, because that's where I think that you see the sort of stamp-based map maker style of map the most. When you look at a map, the first thing that screams this was made in something like Dungeon Draft, or now in this case Inkarnate, is those curved path tools that just don't know how to handle corners. So by placing something over them, be it a pillar or some other element that breaks up that corner, it helps disguise that element of the shortcomings of the tools. And when we're building out the map, as long as we keep that in mind, there's a lot of things that we can do. Now this is a road, so presumably we're going to have some car assets or some other things if we just put something that breaks the boundary here and just covers up a little bit of this corner, hides the problem. Now, if you don't have the time to make your own maps, today's sponsor, DeMille's Wondrous Works, is the perfect option for you. DWW makes high-quality, hand-drawn battle maps for your fantasy campaigns, and they're the original creators of the phased battle maps, which allow your scenes to evolve and change as the battle unfolds. I'm a huge fan of phased battle maps because they add that extra level of drama and spice to boss fights, especially when you're playing in a VTT setting. By signing up to DeMille's Wondrous Works Patreon link below, you'll get access to hundreds of hand-drawn battle maps, dozens of animated maps, and several years worth of 5e and PF2 compatible encounters ready to be used in your games. You can grab a free sample pack of maps to try out, which is linked down below, and when you're ready to sign up, if you use our link in the description of this video, you'll get a 50% lifetime discount for as long as you're a patron using the DWW fuck inflation tier. So thanks again to DeMille's Wondrous Works for sponsoring the video and supporting the channel. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to start working on some buildings. Now, I've done a little bit of testing with this so that we don't have to just watch me do it live in real time on camera and all be bored as I figure out how the hell this works, and I've noticed something kind of weird. Now, there may be a way around this and I haven't found it yet because I haven't had enough chance to play, but when you're making buildings using the room tool, which is what we're going to be covering next, when you place down a building that has its own texture baked into that, it interacts really weirdly with the levels in the scene. So you then can't go in and color on top of that building's floor with a brush tool in a way that intuitively makes sense to me. I'll show you what I mean. So if we go ahead and change our options for the building and choose a wall and a floor. So in terms of walls, I want something fairly basic. So if we go to the Human Alliance, we've got nice blue walls. And then in the floor, so we click on fill, and we can either choose a color or a texture. We're going to go with the texture. And let's figure out human architecture again. So if we go ahead and drag in a room, you can see it places it as though it's a building, places the walls, places the floor. That's great. But if we then go back into the brush tool and use our foreground option, and I'll switch over to something nice and bright here just to make it really easy to see what I'm talking about. So if we try and draw on this particular room, you can see it doesn't work. I can still draw behind it because it is a different level and it interacts with the levels differently, but it won't draw within that floor. If I change my brush layer to be top, I can then go in and it will draw on it, but it draws on top of absolutely everything, and that's not always what you want. Now, you can change what layer this appears in terms of its object positioning, which is really nice, but I can't immediately see any way to impact it with that brush tool. Now, the only way I've found to get around this is if we don't fill in the floor. If we just place the walls using the room tool and then we fill in the floor using the brush tool as normal, that allows you to paint on top of the floor. This is only something that's going to affect people who are looking to do more intricate shadow work, who want to get in there and do painterly textures within the basic thing. If all you want is to just put down some basic rooms and you don't want to do more of the advanced techniques within a program like this, just use the room tool as normal. But I thought it was really worth mentioning because it will keep you from unlocking kind of the true potential of software like this. So if we go ahead and turn off the fill and draw a room, we can then go back in, choose our square brush tool, open up our flooring option, change it to foreground, draw in our floor, and then by doing that, once we switch over to the brush tool, you can see that we can then paint over it. So we can paint in those shadows, environmental effects like lighting and things like that. We have a lot more control over the textures and the colors of the scene by doing it that way, rather than using the room tool as it is at the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our room tool. We're going to turn the floor off because I want the option to go in and do the fancier things with the lighting and things later on if we want to. And we're going to put in a basic building. So we're going to start off by kind of putting it on the corner here, extending it off the edge of the map, because this is just going to be a street corner in some sci-fi city. So we place our walls here, and then the next thing I want to know is, how do doors work? So in the room placement tool, you've got a bunch of different options. You can place differently shaped rooms. You can brush in rooms, which is really nice, being able to brush a specific shape for a room. Really cool, especially when you put the fill on and get in those complex geometries to fill in. Really nice. Then we've got an option for editing the nodes of the wall and minutely changing the shape. But then we have the portals option. Now this will allow you to break the wall, add doors and windows. So this is our next step. We want to add a couple different doors and windows into this to start getting the shell of our building. So if we hover over the wall, you can see it will show where our initial doors are going to be placed. If we turn on our grid, we can see how it looks in relation to the grid. And I'm actually going to turn snap to grid on for this, so that all of our doors are in line with the grid, just to make play a little bit easier when we're using VTTs. So I think for this, what I want to do is I want maybe 3 distinct buildings within this corner. I want one of them maybe down here. I want one of them here and one of them here. And then we'll split them up using interior walls shortly. So these have made openings, and you can see that they have placed custom end caps on those openings so that they're not just hard lines on the texture of the wall. That's something that I really like. Now, I've used a bunch of tools like this, and quite often when you split a path or a room or something, you get these really hard dividing lines. And like I said before, I end up having to go in and put nodes and pillars and columns and things on them to hide that. So I really appreciate that you get those by default. So if you want to just leave the door open, the option is there. It looks like it is done with some intention. Now we want to place our doors. I don't see an option to do that here, so I imagine that is going to be a stamp-based thing, which means, at least initially, this throws into question how much VTT capability this is going to have. So one thing that I know that Inkarnate did mention in the kind of release materials for the 2.0 beta is that you get in snap to grid, and you're also getting kind of dedicated VTT export in relation to that snap to grid. So if we just go and check that out quickly and export as image, we do have the option to export it as a VTT grid, determine our grid's pixel size, and determine how big of a grid we want to export. But that is where it ends. So we will get pixel perfect exports for importing into our VTTs, but we don't get any baked in compatibility. And that's something that Dungeon Draft, for example, still has up over Inkarnate. You can make a map in Dungeon Draft and export it as a universal VTT format, and then pull that into a lot of your virtual tabletop programs like Foundry, etc. And all of the wall, lighting, door information will be baked in right from the start, which can save you a lot of time from having to manually define boundaries within your VTT. Makes a really big difference, and I really, really hope it's something that Inkarnate quite quickly bring in now, because more and more people are playing on virtual tabletops, and I think that if you want to stay kind of on top and you want to be a competitive operator in this space, you have to give that option. But we'll go into the stamp tool and we'll have a look and see what we've got in the way of doors. So we start off with, let's go to the Human Alliance and click on doors, because that's the version of the walls that we're using, and we want to go ahead and rotate them. And my initial thoughts is that they are enormous, and they're also a little bit industrial looking for what I want, but that's not a problem. So we're currently twice as large as we want to be, so we just reduce the size down to 50 and see how that places. So we've got our exterior walls. What about interior walls? Well, that's a perfect opportunity for our line tools, so we'll go ahead and jump back into that, grab the pen stroke, and we'll look and find some interior simple blue walls. Nice and basic, we'll go with that. Now, I'm really interested to see how these walls interact with the other walls. I want them to appear beneath. So let's go ahead and change the layer to be -1 because the others are by default on layer 0. So I'm hoping that by changing this to layer -1, they will appear beneath. So we're going to stick to snap into grid for this because these are interior walls. We want to set the dimensions. And let's go ahead and do that. So it has appeared underneath. Let's go ahead and click off there, put in a new wall, and see whether or not we could get that wall to appear above by selecting it as layer 2, for example. And it does appear above, so that is fairly intuitive for how it interacts with the other walls, which I'm grateful for. It would have been really annoying if it didn't work that way. And changing the layers changes how it interacts with the other walls. Ideal. With our walls in place, we want to start working on flooring. So we're going to drop into the brush tool again, open up the catalog, and look for a couple of different flooring options. So we are going to put snap to grid on. We're going to have it go in like this. We're going to have it go to here and then apply, turn off snap to grid. It doesn't align with the grid. That is really annoying. So this is something that I can manually change fairly easy, but in my mind, if I choose to have snap to grid enabled and I'm placing down a texture that clearly has a grid in it, why is that texture not automatically aligning to either of the axes of the grid? That's something that I feel really should just be the default rather than having to go and manually change it. And it's a really minor nitpick. It's something that on a typical quick map you're not gonna care about. But it's something that if you want to make high quality maps, little things like that are going to slow you down at each stage of the process. And it's another reason to use something else. So in my mind, a texture like this that is gridded at 100% resolution scale at default level, its grid boundaries should align with at least one of the axes. I can understand not aligning in every direction. So if it's got a number of squares within its own grid texture, it might mean that you end up not aligning in every one. But I want it to at least align with some. Otherwise, you get this mess. And if you export out with the grid baked in, this just looks sloppy. If I turn the grid off, it looks great. But with the grid on, which is how people are more likely to be playing in VTT play, it looks wrong. It looks like someone has done the job wrong. So next thing I want to do is I want to place some more paths and textures, snazz up the road a little bit, get to the point where we're ready to start adding stamps, and I'll do all that unless I run into a problem and then come back. Okay, and here we are. I've placed some more paths. I've done some road markings, some central road markings, these little crossings, and these little curbside markings. And then I threw a barrier down just because I was interested to see how the Jersey barriers looked, and pretty impressed. Threw some barbed wire on there, all looking pretty good. So I think we're ready to move into stamps, and pretty excited about this. I really like Inkarnate for its stamps. It's one of the main reasons why I switched to it as my primary map making tool over things like Wonder Draft and Dungeon Draft, because the stamps are such higher resolution, especially when you export at 8K. They look really crisp, they look really nice. So I'm excited to see what the sci-fi stamps look like, because they are all pretty new to me. So there are actually quite a lot. I wasn't expecting such a large amount of stamps right off the bat, because it's a brand new style. I was expecting a much smaller offering. It's very cool that there's terrain, city, and spaceship options right away. And what I want to start with is I want to start looking for cars, because I really like adding cars to maps for sci-fi, and it seems like we got a pretty decent selection between the city cars and the corporate cars, and then some industrial district options. So we've got things like trucks and gas trucks, and something that I think is really cool is there's 2 states for each type of car. So there's a version where the lights are on and it's supposed to be in motion, I guess, and there's a version where it's off, and I really like that. So we're going to go with a taxi because it's nice and vibrant and, you know, big and yellow, and we're going to have a look and see, and that sizing is actually pretty good at 53. I might up it a little bit. I think 63 might be good. Nah, let's up it a little bit more. 73. Let's go 75 and call it there. And that gives us our car scale. So all of the cars will be at 75. Quite narrow streets, but I think that works for a cyberpunky, dystopian-y city. And you know, we could fill this road up with cars. We could have them, you know, absolutely everywhere. Or we could use a car to cover up that corner cap. I think just having a car sort of parked on this corner as if they're going to pick someone up from out here. So we zoom in, and I want to get them so they're right on the curb there, like that. And if we turn the grid off so we can get a proper look at it, this is a nice texture. So we get some specular highlights and some reflections. We get a little bit of interior detailing. The glass looks really nice. Overall, very impressed with the quality of the car stamps. Let's go ahead and look and see what other options we've got. So we have a bunch of different sections. We've got Arid Worlds, City, Corporate, Human Alliance Fleet, Industrial District, Lighting, Shops, and Simians Horrificus? Weird Alien Bug Planets. We're going to go with Shops, I think. I'm going to start off by populating one of these stores. And I think I can see some racks, some empty weapons cabinets and some filled weapons cabinets. So we're going to go ahead and grab these, set our sizing back to the default 100. I'm going to make this a little corner gun shop, I think. That's very dystopian and sci-fi. This is cool. That's one of the coolest elements of sci-fi map making, I think, is all of the neon signs that you can get. So we will put a weapon shop sign outside this holographic SMG on display. I think that's a really neat option, and while we're at it, we will use this as an opportunity to experiment with some lighting tools. So this is a hollow sign that is bouncing some nice blue light around. So I want to go into the brush tool. I want to open up the color option. I want to select a nice blue tone, something that's going to match relatively well, and I want to check against that. So I want something that's a little more blue. So shift that over towards the blue a little. Something more like that, yeah. So we're going to drop the opacity way down, and we're just going to start painting in some light and see how that looks. That looks pretty good to start. Let's see how... Right, so we want the softness all the way up. We want to increase our brush size, I think, and increase the opacity a little bit, and then just start painting in a little bit of a light, and immediately those are the kind of little details that elevate your map. So placing a stamp down like that is fine. Placing a stamp down like that and adding just a little hint of light that's being cast upon the world from that goes a long way. And if we wanted to go further, we could change this from foreground to top, so it paints on top of everything. We could drop our brush size way down, increase our opacity a little bit, and start painting in some rim highlights on the walls there so it looks like it's also casting that light on the wall. And that way you get these elements that look as though they're interacting with their environment. Really big element of making elevated maps. So I'm going to go ahead and just really quickly finish up this map, add some more details, and then I'll come back, show you how it looks at the end, and talk about my closing thoughts for the Inkarnate 2.0 beta. Okay, and here's my little sci-fi scene, a little corner shop section. We have a gun store, a little grocery store, and a little terrifying chop shop doctors with a couple of Android limb containers and just a body on a chair, and it's a dystopian nightmare. Overall, I'm pretty impressed with Inkarnate 2.0. It is definitely a big step in the right direction for what I want from this program, but there is still a long way to go. There's a lot that they can do to make this more VTT friendly. I think that they definitely need to add tools to allow you to export the wall and lighting information. Lighting is probably a thing that they need to add. Much more VTT integration. But beyond that, I've only got a couple of really minor gripes with the 2.0 beta so far. The alignment of the grid to the textures, that's pretty frustrating. And the way in which the floor of the room tool interacts with being able to brush on it. But other than that, I've been really impressed with the 2.0 beta so far. It's not nearly as substantial a change as I think I was expecting, because we've waited for so long for this, because it's getting on for like 2 years now since it was first announced, compared to when everyone will finally be able to get access to this. You build up expectation during that time. You can't help but build hype and build an expectation over such a long period of time. And it's not that this doesn't meet the expectation, because I think it is good. It's just that it's not as drastic a step up from the Inkarnate that there was before as I was expecting. It's kind of bringing the functionality up almost to the other kind of map making options available out there today, but there's still some way to go, and I hope that the beta will continue to roll out new features, and I'll keep making new videos when they do, now that the beta is finally here, and hopefully it will continue to grow and continue to be an awesome option for people looking to map make on a budget, because there is that free version of Inkarnate, which is a really attractive option if you don't want to go and spend a bunch of money on making maps. I'd really like to know what you think of the Inkarnate beta so far down in the description below. I'd also like to know what kind of videos you'd like to see me make on Inkarnate down there before. And if you haven't already, check out this video where I go over my reasons for switching from Wonder Draft and Dungeon Draft to Inkarnate. But until next time, happy gaming.